They had a cure for the plague. They filtered water with mud and charcoal. They could track a wounded deer across rock just by the smell of crushed leaves. We think we're smart, but when the power grid dies, and it will, you're going to wish you knew what a medieval peasant knew. Forget your bug-out bag. We're talking about skills woven into the DNA of the very soil we walk on. The ghost of Ashwell Forest. The cold hand of fate. The year is 1349. The Black Death has already devoured half of England. It is a time when the invisible enemy, a microbe unseen and utterly unknown, holds more sway than any king or god. Ilara was 14, but the famine and the fever that stole her parents from the tiny, miserable village of Oakhaven had prematurely hardened her face and sharpened her gaze. She was not a peasant by birth, but a scholar's daughter, gifted with a literacy that was, in this time, a weapon more potent than any sword. She knew Latin, she knew the stars, and she knew the herbal remedies meticulously logged in her father's scorched, leather-bound notebook, a book that now represented her entire inheritance. Her problem was not the plague itself, but its aftermath, the utter collapse of the social order. The Lord of Oakhaven was dead, his manor burned by villagers convinced that fumigation with pitch and smoke was the only defense. The village itself was now a ghost town. Its remaining 5 inhabitants, a senile priest, a terrified smith, a young pregnant woman, and Ilara, surrounded by a landscape of suddenly ownerless fields, cattle wandering free, and silent, empty homes.
Ilara lifted the leather notebook, its binding scarred but intact. You will learn the ways they have forgotten. The Romans didn't build watchtowers in open fields, Gareth. They built them to protect the secrets of the land. My father said surviving isn't about strength or wealth, it's about knowledge, and this book holds that knowledge. And so, with 3 scavenged hand axes, a few sacks of barely edible grain, a coil of rope, and the terrifying knowledge that civilization had ceased to exist, the 4 survivors set off for Ashwell Forest, carrying a legacy of lost knowledge that could save them or bury them. The art of thriving in the dark. The first weeks in the woods were a brutal education. Gareth, the powerful smith, was useless. The skills of heating iron and shaping metal meant nothing when you needed to find food without a bow, build shelter without a saw, or purify water without a well. The small amount of grain ran out fast. Fear and hunger mounted. "We're thirsty," wailed Agnes, the pregnant woman, her face pale. The stream they found was stagnant and brown. "We'll get the bloody flux!" Ilara opened the weathered book. The page was titled, in bold, stark Latin, Aquae Purgatio per Nature, Purification of Water by Nature. "This is one of the forgotten techniques," Ilara said, digging a deep hole 6 feet from the riverbank with one of the scavenged axes. The medieval peasant knew this, but the townsfolk forgot it. "We're building a medieval filter, a seep well." She instructed Gareth to line the pit with large stones, then fill the stone-lined pit with alternating layers. First, a thick layer of fine, clean sand, then a layer of coarse gravel, and finally, a deep bed of charcoal salvaged from Oakhaven's burnt manor. "The water from the river will seep through the soil into the hole," Ilara explained. "But before it reaches the surface, it must pass through the sand, the gravel, and the activated charcoal. The sand filters the solids. The gravel provides space. The charcoal absorbs the impurities and the bad taste." Within an hour, a small pool of surprisingly clear, cool water began to fill the bottom of the pit. Agnes wept with relief, and even the skeptical Gareth drank deeply. Survival Lesson 1. The ground is your greatest tool. The next challenge was food. With no ability to hunt or fish, they were reduced to foraging roots and berries, which offered little sustenance. Gareth grew increasingly desperate, threatening to turn back. "You need protein and fat to survive the cold, Gareth," Ilara said one evening, observing him shivering violently by their pitiful fire. And a peasant rarely hunted with a bow. It was forbidden by the lords, who kept the forest game for themselves. So they used something quieter, more clever. She turned the pages to a section marked Capistrum Ingenii, the snare of ingenuity. The diagram showed a small, flexible tree sapling, bent taut, held down by a finely carved wooden trigger and a loop of twisted vine placed over a narrow rabbit trail. The figure 4 trap, the classic medieval peasant's silent hunter.
"The rabbit steps here, on the trigger stick, releasing the tension," Ilara whispered, demonstrating the mechanism. "The sapling springs up, and the snare tightens around the rabbit's leg. It's a passive trap. You set it and leave it." They spent the following day collecting strong, flexible vines, the only thing they could use to make a rope loop, and constructing 10 such snares around the forest floor. The next morning, they had 3 rabbits, a bounty that saved them from starvation. Survival Lesson 2. Ingenuity beats brute force. The secret of the living larder. Deep in Ashwell, the forest began to change. The trees became ancient, enormous oaks, their branches thick and gnarled. Ilara knew they were getting closer to the elder path. Following the meticulous directions in her father's book, which included triangulation with certain prominent, unusually shaped stars, they finally stumbled upon it, a vast moss-covered cobblestone path, straight as an arrow, a remnant of the long-dead Roman Empire. 2 days along this path, they saw it, a massive, half-ruined stone tower rising defiantly from a clearing, exactly as the book had described. Its mortar was crumbled, and its interior was open to the sky, but its structure was sound. "Shelter," Gareth breathed, running a hand over the cold, hard stone. "Real walls."
The tower was a blessing, but winter was approaching, and they still lacked one crucial thing: a way to store food for the long, cold months. The rabbits wouldn't last. The priest's cough worsened, and Ilara knew they had to be prepared for total isolation. The notebook held the answer in a chapter titled Volta Humida, the damp vault. "We will not build an above-ground larder," Ilara declared. The medieval peasant knew that the best place to keep food is below the frost line, where the temperature remains constant. They spent a week digging a deep, 10-foot square hole in the ground just outside the tower walls, lining it with large flat stones scavenged from the ruined Roman road. Ilara then mixed a crude, thick plaster of clay, fine sand and straw, a medieval cement known as wattle and daub, and coated the walls of the pit to keep it dry. Finally, they covered the entire structure with thick wooden planks and a deep layer of soil, leaving only a small, tightly fitting wooden door. "This is a root cellar," Ilara explained to Gareth, wiping sweat and clay from her brow. "It is an earthen refrigerator. Because the earth itself is the insulator, the temperature inside will stay just above freezing, regardless of the brutal cold outside. This keeps our foraged roots, nuts, and preserved meat from freezing or rotting." But what about the meat? They could catch rabbits, but it would spoil in days. This brought them to the most ingenious survival skill of all: medieval smoke curing. Using the stones from the ruined tower,
They constructed a small, low-walled smokehouse with a tiny, barely smoldering fire of green, bark-free oak chips that produced a continuous, thick, cool smoke. They would hang the strips of rabbit meat inside, not to cook it, but to bathe it in the preservative smoke. "The smoke does 3 things," Ilara instructed, her voice filled with a teacher's certainty, citing her father's notes. "First, it dries the meat, removing the water that bacteria need. Second, the smoke contains formaldehyde and creosote, natural preservatives. Third, the slow smoke cures it, creating a hard, flavorful outer layer. This meat, sealed in the root cellar, will last all winter." Gareth, who had been a doubter, was speechless. The fire that his people feared as an engine of destruction was, in this ancient way, an engine of preservation. Survival Lesson 3. The tools of civilization are temporary. The principles of nature are eternal. The Plague Cure and the Iron Man. As the weeks turned into a cold, damp autumn, the group was surviving. They had water, preserved food, and the massive stone tower for shelter. They were thriving, not just enduring. Ilara was not just a scholar. She was becoming a leader, her knowledge proving more valuable than any man's strength. But the invisible enemy followed. One morning, Agnes, the pregnant woman, woke up with a chilling, marble-sized swelling in her armpit. A bubo. The plague had found them.
Despair was a cold, immediate thing. Gareth drew his axe, ready to abandon her. Even Ilara felt the bitter hopelessness. But then the notebook fell open to a page with a frantic, bold drawing of a medicinal plant. Antidotum pestis. Antidote for the plague. The medieval doctors failed because they believed in humors and curses, Ilara muttered, tears blurring her eyes as she searched for the plant's description. My father sought the peasant's wisdom. The text described a process used by folk healers and hermits, a cure that modern science would eventually recognize as a form of powerful immune system stimulant and antiseptic. It wasn't a true cure, but a method to survive the first critical fever. The key ingredient was a plant Ilara immediately recognized, meadowsweet, Filipendula ulmaria, a common herb with a distinct almond-like scent. The book insisted that this herb, along with a complex poultice of crushed garlic, a powerful natural antiseptic, vinegar, and a small amount of yeast-rich fermented barley beer, be applied directly to the bubo. The meadowsweet contains salicylic acid, Ilara explained, crushing the plant's leaves. It's a natural painkiller and fever reducer, like the medicine in the willow bark. We must reduce her fever immediately. The heat is what kills her. The poultice draws out the poison.
For 3 days and 3 nights, Ilara applied the intensely foul-smelling poultice, changing it every hour. The priest, Thomas, now too weak to stand, could only mumble prayers. Gareth stayed back, terrified. Slowly, impossibly, Agnes's fever broke. The bubo did not vanish, but it softened and eventually began to shrink. She had survived. The peasant's medicine had triumphed where the courtly physicians had failed. The event fundamentally changed Gareth. The terror of the plague and the power of Ilara's knowledge shattered his arrogance. He was a smith, and the group needed a smith. "The tower is secure, Ilara," he said, his voice quiet. "But we are surrounded by ghosts. Every house in the region is abandoned, but there are no proper iron tools, no plows, no axes, no proper knives." He pointed to the rusted scraps of broken iron littering the Roman road.
These Romans, they built good roads, but their tools are all soft iron. The people who lived here centuries ago, the Saxons, they knew better. They knew the secret of bloomery steel. Gareth, finally in his element, began to explain his own forgotten craft, the original medieval secret of steel.
The king's smiths used charcoal furnaces and bellows, which were expensive, Gareth explained. But a peasant smith uses only a pit in the earth and an air duct to feed the fire. We will use the clay from the root cellar to build a simple dome-shaped clay furnace, a bloomery. We will pack it with alternating layers of iron ore and charcoal made from burnt wood. He was using a forgotten, low-tech method of metallurgy. By creating a shallow, hot pit furnace, he would heat the iron ore to a near liquid state, just below the temperature needed to completely melt it. The resulting spongy mass, the bloom, would be hammered and folded repeatedly to expel the impurities and trap the carbon from the charcoal, turning the soft iron into hard, functional steel. With real steel, we can build proper tools, plows for the spring, better knives for hunting, and a real axe, Gareth declared, finally finding his purpose. We can not just survive, we can rebuild. Survival Lesson 4. The greatest strength lies in combining the forgotten knowledge of the mind, scholars' herbs, with the forgotten knowledge of the hand, smith's steel.
The seed of a new world. The winter of 1349 was brutal, but the four survivors, the scholar, the smith, the priest, and the mother-to-be, thrived in the heart of Ashwell forest. They ate smoked meat and stored roots from the root cellar. They heated the stone tower not with an open fireplace, which wasted most of the heat, but with a central raised hearth and a complex system of heated floors, a primitive form of Roman hypocaust, where hot air circulated beneath a raised stone floor before escaping through a chimney. It was a complex, forgotten system, but the book and Gareth's engineering skills brought it to life, keeping the inner chamber surprisingly warm. In the spring, Agnes gave birth to a healthy baby girl. The priest, Thomas, though still frail, used the time to meticulously copy Ilara's father's notebook onto preserved animal hides, ensuring the knowledge would not die with them. The knowledge they used, the seep well, the figure 4 snare, the root cellar, the smoke curing, the bloomery steel, and the heated floors, were not the primitive skills of a savage, but the highly sophisticated, low-tech, time-tested wisdom of 1,000 years of peasantry. They were the forgotten medieval survival techniques, ignored by the nobility, but essential for life.
Gareth, the former doubter, forged a sturdy new steel plowshare, and together the group worked the ownerless land near the tower. They were free of the feudal system, free of the plague, and masters of their own destiny. They were not just a group of survivors, they were the first family of a new settlement, a small flame of civilization built entirely on the forgotten ingenuity of the past. As Ilara watched the first steel-plowed furrow turn the rich black earth, she knew the terrible truth. The Black Death had not just killed people, it had wiped the slate clean. And the survival of humanity rested not with kings and priests, but with the quiet wisdom of the peasant, a wisdom she now carried in the pages of a small leather-bound book. "We will call this place Novus Fortis," Ilara whispered to the baby in Agnes's arms. "New strength, a new beginning, forged from the cold, hard lessons of the Middle Ages."